I want to thank you, Frank, for that introduction. You read it just like my mother wrote it. And I want to thank all of you for the privilege of being able to spend some time with you this morning. President Knapp, thank you for your gracious invitation. It is remarkable the things that you are doing, stewarding George Washington University into the next level of global leadership. And I also want to thank and acknowledge Secretary Powell. Focusing on technology and innovation at the State Department, I and my colleagues owe a great debt to Secretary Powell, who during his tenure as Secretary of State brought the State Department from the 19th to the 21st century over the course of his tenure. I want to talk about the one thing that I've learned working for Hillary Clinton for the last 3 years. The one most important thing I've learned is that there is a massive shift in geopolitical power taking place around the world right now. Now, a lot of people talk about shifts in geopolitical power on a geographic basis, from west to east, from Europe and America to Asia, from the global north to the global south. What I want to talk about is a shift in power that I think is impacting everybody, including people here in Asia, and which is wildly disruptive. And that is the shift of power made possible by the internet, made powerful by increasingly ubiquitous and powerful information networks. It's moving power from hierarchies, including the nation state, including government, to citizens and networks of citizens. We're seeing power move from centralized structures to decentralized structures as processing and distribution power is now available to the individual in ways that weren't previously possible. And I want to give a few examples of that. One example, next slide, could be seen after the earthquake in Haiti. The earthquake in Haiti took place in sort of late afternoon, early evening in Washington, D.C. And Secretary Clinton was in Hawaii. She was about to get on a plane and fly to Papua New Guinea, a trip that she never got to take. And we got her on the phone and we explained the level of devastation, what had taken place in Haiti with the earthquake and what we believed would be a significant amount of death and destruction. And what she said to us on the phone, she said, by the time people have their first cup of their coffee in their hand tomorrow morning, and they're either watching TV, listening to the radio, or sitting in front of their computers, at the very moment that they are first learning about this tragedy, I want you to have come up with something right then, right at that very moment for the American people to give back. And there are 3 young women in my office, 2 Katies and a Caitlin. And these young women had an idea. They said, you know what, everybody has a cell phone, and everybody sends text messages, SMS like crazy. Why don't we set up a program so that every time somebody sends an SMS, a text message with the word Haiti in it, and if they send it to a specific short code, $10 will be added to their phone bill, and all $10 will go to the Red Cross for earthquake relief in Haiti. We thought this was a pretty good idea, and we thought we might be able to raise a couple $100,000. But then we thought about social media, and we thought about how even though none of us were famous, none of us were celebrities, none of us were particularly powerful, we thought that if we, just as a little group of 4 of us, could build a campaign, we might be able to raise a significant amount of money. And so what we did using the dark arts of social media, in 2 weeks we raised $35 million in $10 increments. More than 3 million Americans sent that text message. And the way that we were able to do that is because power, for lack of a better word, had devolved to individuals. In the past, it would have taken a major media company partner. It would have taken celebrities. It would have taken 100 committee meetings. It would have taken a marketing budget of hundreds of thousands of dollars to build such a massive campaign. But now, because it is so easy to take a simple message or a simple campaign and make it viral, if it's executed intelligently, if it's executed correctly, a couple young diplomats are able to build a campaign that raises $35 million in 2 weeks. Now, I think it's important to not be utopian about this shift in power from hierarchies to citizens by virtue of the internet, by virtue of these information networks. The technology itself is value neutral. It takes on the values and intentions of the people who use it. My boss, Hillary Clinton, put this very well, where she said, in the same manner in which steel can be used to build a machine gun or a hospital, in the same way in which nuclear power can be used to fuel a city or destroy a city, so too can our information networks contribute to the promise or peril of the 21st century. Next slide. One example of this, I believe, and one example that I think is going to be of increasing relevance in this region, relates to cybercrime. In the same manner in which a couple of young diplomats are able to build a massive marketing campaign that raises $35 million, so too can people with completely different intentions have their capabilities massively increased. And what we are seeing now is 19, 20, 21-year-olds being able to engage in criminal activity that previously would have taken the power of a massive criminal cartel. And so this shift in power, I think it's important to think about in non-utopian terms. Thinking a little bit about Korea specifically for a moment, and thinking about one of the connotations is for Korea, next slide. One of the great opportunities, I think, with this shift in power and with increasingly ubiquitous and powerful information networks goes to innovation. Korea is perfectly suited for this moment in time. Korea is not a country that's necessarily best situated to make the innovations of others most cheaply, but they are very well positioned to come up with the next breakthrough innovations in electronics, in mobile applications, in the industries and businesses that are going to propel the 21st century economy. And so when I think about the shift of power, when I think about the impact of the internet and the increasing proliferation of mobile technologies, I think that Korea is extremely well positioned. Now, I was asked yesterday what this means for the region, what this means for the ASEAN region and the ASEAN nations. And I think it means different things for different nation states. But I would point to one thing that I think could bode particularly well for the region and for many of the nations within it whose economic well-being has been throttled back by corruption. One of the fascinating things that the internet does is it shines sunlight. It makes the world more transparent. And one of the things that we know is that sunlight is the best disinfectant. And it's fascinating to me to see throughout so much of Asia and places that have had its economic well-being significantly held back by problems with corruption. Now that people have cell phones, that with video capability, now that people have the ability to name and shame, now that people have the ability to self-publish and act as citizen journalists, one of the things that we see is corruption being exposed on a massive scale. And I think that, as many studies have detailed, corruption is one of the things that has most inhibited economic growth throughout East Asia in recent years. And one of the things that I think is most promising for East Asia, as these mobile networks become more ubiquitous, as citizens begin to take action and take charge of what happens in their country, in part by using these tools, I think the fight against corruption. I think that there are new tools in the fight against corruption. I can't give this talk, and especially can't give this talk in Asia, without people asking about, you can go back to the last slide, without talking about China. And so I'm oftentimes asked, they say, you know, Alec, you know, so much of what you're talking about is premised on an open internet. So much of what you're talking about is an internet as it was imagined in the defense labs in the United States where it was built, and end-user communication without government mediating in the middle. And they said, well, what about China? I think that what's happening in China in the internet space right now is fascinating. There are now 500 million internet users in China. There are 300 million social media users in China, and 250 million of the internet users in China are under the age of 25. And so given those demographics, given those numbers, what I believe is that the internet of the future is going to be, the internet of the future in China is going to be determined by those 250 million Chinese citizens under the age of 25 who are growing up digital. I think that they will define the internet of the future. But looking at the present day, one of the things that I believe is true in China is true in much of the rest of the world. Despite the billions of dollars, despite the tens of thousands of people being employed to manage the information environment that is the Chinese internet, I think we're seeing an increasing loss of control in that space. And by way of illustration, I want to tell the short story of a train crash that took place last July in the Wenzhou province. When this train crash took place, 40-some people died and 190-some people were hurt. After the train crash, as is typical, the Chinese government issued official guidance to the media describing what had happened. And in that official guidance, they blamed foreign technology. They said that there was no culpability among people who worked for the government. But what happened, interestingly, was that people who were on the train and people who witnessed the train crash began to post on a Chinese microblogging website called Sina Weibo. And 26 million posts were posted in the 2 weeks following this train crash, most of which contradicted the official story coming out of the Chinese government. And one thing that's interesting is if you look at this image here, you can see the train cars on the ground. The train cars were actually buried on site as a way of not just figuratively but literally covering up what had happened. After these 26 million posts by Chinese citizens on Sina Weibo, the Chinese government literally dug up the train cars, started a new investigation, and for the first time, I think, in recent history, completely revised its official guidance. Now, a year ago, if you had searched for my name on a Chinese search engine, there would have been 3 million entries. And then one day it went from 3 million to 0. The Chinese government determined that it was in their interest for me to literally not exist on the Chinese internet. And so you can take a person, in this case me, and using the billions of dollars you spend on the issue and the thousands of people employed, you can literally surgically extract someone. But what you can't do is take millions of your citizens issuing 20+ million messages and extract an entire society, extract something from an entire digital ecosystem. Now, this loss of control that we see taking place around the world, and which I just detailed in China, is not the case of, an American sort of finger wagging. Oh, look what's happening in the Middle East. Oh, look what's happening in China. This dynamic is as strong in the United States as it is anywhere around the world. And by one quick example, I'll point to a piece of online piracy legislation called SOPA. Have any of you heard of this? Most heads are nodding, yes. So SOPA, for those of you who don't know, was a piece of proposed online piracy legislation. In its shortest form, it was something that would compel the internet companies to take certain actions to block pirated content on the internet. And this started out in sort of a traditional Washington binary conflict. It was Northern California versus Southern California. It was the internet companies versus Hollywood and the content companies. And then something fascinating happened. The same dynamics that took place in China with the train crash. What happened was millions of American citizens, predominantly young, 14 to 21 years old, became educated about this piece of online piracy legislation, and they built a massive internet campaign. And it was fascinating for me as I was at the White House, as I was at the State Department, the number of people who were talking and saying, you know what, I've been working in a senior level of government for 20 years and my kids have never talked to me about what I do for a living. But this morning at breakfast, I got confronted by my 17-year-old about this piece of online piracy legislation. This happened hundreds and thousands of times over. And so what started off as a traditional Washington conflict was completely blown apart by this, again, this fragmentation of power, processing and distribution power, communication power, going to citizens and networks of citizens in ways that previously were unimaginable. And in the face of this, government oftentimes becomes overwhelmed. This loss of control is something that irks governments around the world. And I think that one thing we can definitively say is that the 21st century is a lousy time to be a control freak. And that it is a test of the character of our governments all around the world, how we respond to this loss of control. Are we going to fight the empowerment of our citizens? Are we going to fight the new capabilities that they have by virtue of connection technologies, or are we going to harness it on our self-interests? I'm going to close by just giving a couple quick examples of some of the things that we're doing at the State Department to try to harness this. Go to the next slide. One example is, as we've tried to integrate technology and social media into the work of diplomats, one of the things that we've consistently heard back from our senior foreign service officers is, I get it, I understand that it's important, but I don't understand how to do it. I need some coaching to help us as diplomats become smart in this social media sphere. And so we built a program called the Virtual Student Foreign Service, recognizing, I'm 40 years old, so I'm 15 years older than digital natives. But I don't care what country you're in, I don't care what color your skin is. If you're 25 years or younger, you're like a fish in water when it comes to the internet. And so we wanted to leverage this capability that young people naturally had for technology, and we built an internship program where university students in the United States are literally coaching our senior foreign service officers and working with our embassies and building programs. And in the last 2 years that we've done this program, we've had more than 90 countries have more than 300 interns where these young people are teaching our diplomats how to become digitally savvy, and it's been remarkably successful. Another example that I'll give goes to this thing that we've created called Tech Camps, Civil Society 2.0. One of the things that Hillary Clinton has been committed to since she was First Lady of Arkansas is strengthening civil society. Now, the United States has its strengths and its weaknesses, but one of our undeniable strengths is the strength of our technology and our ability to innovate. And so one of the things that we've done in the last 2 years is we've essentially built a bridge between our community of technologists and innovators and civil society organizations around the globe. And in fact, I'm going to be going to Thailand in a few days where we're doing one of these tech camps. But what in essence we're doing is we are taking about 10 to 15 sort of Silicon Valley geeks, flying them around the world, putting them in a room for a couple days with civil society organizations who could be working on anything from women's empowerment to clean water issues to election monitoring or what have you. And over the course of those 2 days, the civil society organizations articulate what their needs are, and the technologists work with them to come up with solutions. And I'll just give one example of that. I was in Lithuania recently where we were doing a tech camp for civil society organizations from 17 countries. And there was a gentleman there who was a disability activist from Ukraine. And one of the things that he said was that there was no information anywhere about handicap accessible facilities in Ukraine. And this is something he had been working on for 5 years. And as he was sitting there describing the problem, one of these techies was tapping away on his computer, and he found a data set for some obscure Ukrainian branch of government, and he called a guy from the other side of the room who was a digital map maker. And over the next hour, they built an application such that if you type in an address on your cell phone, you will see a map of all the disability accessible facilities within a couple miles of where you live. So what's fascinating is that this is an issue that this activist had been working on for years, and a solution was produced in a few hours by bringing together the civil society organization and these techies. So this is a way in which, as this power, as these capabilities devolve to individuals, we, at least at the State Department, are trying to not fight it. but trying to harness it in our self-interests. So in the face of this, in the face of all of this change, what I say to leaders around the world, is a variation of a point made by Darwin. It's not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but that most adaptable to change. Thank you.